In the fall of 2002, a former Polaroid machinist named Dan O'Neill opened an envelope he'd waited a year for. Inside was a settlement check, $47. He'd given the company 31 years. This was Polaroid. At its peak, the company employed more than 20,000 people and called itself, proudly, a family business, even though it was one of the largest employers in the state of Massachusetts. The company that invented instant photography, the company that beat Eastman Kodak in the largest patent lawsuit in American history and won. The company whose cameras and film were, for decades, one of the most trusted names in the country. And weeks before Dan O'Neill's former employer went bankrupt, its top executives were approved for millions of dollars in bonuses. This is the story of a company that won almost every battle that mattered, and still found a way to lose the war, to the market, and to its own people. It starts, like a lot of great American inventions do, with a question nobody else thought to ask. In the early 1930s, a Harvard dropout named Edwin Land became obsessed with a very specific problem: how to make light behave. Specifically, how to build an inexpensive material that could polarize light, filtering out the glare that made driving, photography, and countless other everyday tasks harder than they needed to be. In 1932, Land partnered with his former Harvard physics professor, George Wheelwright III, and founded a small optics lab. 5 years later, it was reincorporated under a new name: Polaroid. Land was an unusual kind of executive. He rarely wore a tie, and colleagues described him working in long, obsessive stretches when he was deep inside a problem.
He was less a businessman who happened to invent things, and more a scientist who happened to also run a public company. For its first decade, Polaroid wasn't in the camera business at all. It made polarizing sunglasses, filters, and when World War II arrived, the company redirected almost everything it made toward the war effort: goggles, gun sights, periscopes, rangefinders, and components for one of the most closely guarded pieces of technology in the entire war, the Norden bomb sight. Land had built a serious optics company. By the war's end, Polaroid employed thousands of people it hadn't had before, running around the clock on contracts the government couldn't discuss in detail. Precision optics, it turned out, was wartime work too. He was about to build something else entirely. The idea came from his 3-year-old daughter. In 1943, on a family vacation, Land's daughter Jennifer asked him a simple question after he took her picture. Why couldn't she see it right away? Most inventors would have given her a simple answer about how film works. Land spent the next 4 years trying to make her question obsolete. On February 21, 1947, he stood in front of a room and demonstrated something nobody in that room had ever seen: a photograph developing itself in under a minute without a darkroom. By November of 1948, the first Polaroid Land camera went on sale at a department store in Boston. 57 cameras, every roll of film they had. All of it sold out on the very first day. For the next 2 decades, Polaroid didn't just sell cameras. It sold a small piece of magic that fit in your hand. Grip the camera, press the button, pull the print, watch in real time as an image climbed up out of nothing. No other product on the market did that.
No competitor came close. Birthday parties, weddings, Christmas mornings. For an entire generation, the Polaroid wasn't just a camera in the room. It was part of how the moment got remembered, passed hand to hand around a room before the image had even finished forming. And then, in 1972, Edwin Land unveiled the thing he considered the closest he'd ever come to perfection: the SX70. A fully automatic, motorized camera that folded flat enough to fit in a coat pocket, focused itself, and ejected a color photograph that developed itself in the open air. No peeling, no timing, no darkroom chemistry required at all. Land called it ultimate simplicity. Reporters who watched him demonstrate it that day described it like they were watching a magic trick performed by the inventor of magic itself. He didn't just show the camera off. He walked the room through the entire concept of what a camera even was,
then unfolded the SX70 from what looked like a flat leather wallet into a fully working single-lens reflex camera in one motion. It was theater as much as it was product demonstration, and it worked exactly the way he wanted it to. The business model behind it was elegant too. Sell the camera at a modest markup, then profit again and again every single time someone bought more film. One SX70 film pack cost about $1.50 to manufacture and sold for nearly $7. For a while, it was one of the best businesses in America. Then, in 1976, Polaroid's biggest rival decided it wanted a piece of that business too. Eastman Kodak, the largest photography company on Earth, released its own line of instant cameras and instant film, built, Polaroid alleged, on technology that belonged to them. Polaroid sued.
What followed was one of the longest, most expensive patent fights in American corporate history. Nearly a decade in courtrooms, mountains of technical testimony about chemistry, optics, and film mechanics. Polaroid's lawyers had to prove piece by piece that 10 separate patents covering everything from the film's chemical pods to the camera's internal mechanisms had been directly copied. Kodak's lawyers argued their engineers had built something different enough to stand on its own. In 1985, a federal court ruled in Polaroid's favor completely. Kodak was ordered to stop manufacturing and selling instant cameras and film immediately, an almost unheard of outcome for a company as large as Kodak. Kodak also had to buy back or refund millions of instant cameras it had already sold to ordinary customers at its own expense. 5 years later, in 1990, Kodak agreed to pay Polaroid roughly $925 million in damages. It remains, to this day, one of the largest patent judgments in American history. By any normal measure, Polaroid had just won everything. It had legally proven its most dangerous competitor stole its technology, it had forced that competitor completely out of the market, it had collected the largest patent check most lawyers would ever see in their careers. And underneath all of that victory, something else was already happening, something no lawsuit could fix. While Polaroid and Kodak spent the better part of a decade fighting over instant film, the entire world of photography was quietly moving somewhere else entirely: digital imaging. Polaroid had actually done early pioneering work in digital sensor technology of its own.
But the company's entire business, its entire identity, was still built around chemistry, film packs, developing pods, the tactile ritual of watching a photo appear. Winning the Kodak lawsuit didn't require Polaroid to rethink any of that, so largely it didn't. It's a strange kind of trap. When you've just legally proven the entire industry considers your technology worth stealing, it's easy to conclude the technology itself must still be the future. Polaroid had every reason, on paper, to feel confident. That confidence turned out to be the most expensive thing the company owned. A few years earlier, in 1977, Land had already tried to push the company in a new direction with something called Polavision, an instant home movie system. It was, by nearly every account, a disaster. Expensive, complicated, and arriving right as ordinary videotape systems were taking over American living rooms instead. Where the SX70 had felt inevitable the moment people saw it, Polavision felt like a solution to a problem nobody had actually asked to solve. Polaroid wrote off nearly $90 million on the failure. Not long after, Land was pushed out as chairman of the company he'd built from nothing. He died in 1991, holding 535 patents, second only in American history to Thomas Edison himself. Without Land, Polaroid kept doing what had always worked. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, new leadership tried to keep the film business profitable, while digital cameras got cheaper, sharper, and more common every single year. Between 1995 and 1998 alone, Polaroid posted $359 million in losses.
In 1995, a new CEO, Gary DiCamillo, took over and pushed the company towards serious cost-cutting and finally, its own line of digital cameras. By 2000, that digital line had actually captured a real slice of the market, something like 16% of digital camera sales. It was a genuine pivot. It was also about a decade too late. The film business that still funded most of the company's revenue was shrinking faster than the new digital line could replace it, and the debt Polaroid had taken on trying to survive the transition was already becoming impossible to service. In October of 2001, Polaroid Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, carrying close to $1 billion in debt. What happened in the days and weeks around that filing is the part of this story most people have never heard. Just before declaring bankruptcy, Polaroid eliminated medical coverage, life insurance, and severance benefits for its retirees, people who'd worked at the company for 20, 30, sometimes over 35 years. Weeks later, Polaroid went back to the bankruptcy court, this time asking for permission to pay up to $19 million in bonuses to roughly 45 top executives. The company's official argument was that it needed to retain leadership through the restructuring. Retirees, watching their own benefits disappear at the exact same moment, formed an association and tried to block it. They lost. Court records show the company pursued the bonuses anyway. Reporting at the time indicates roughly $4.5 million ultimately went out to top executives, money paid out of the same bankrupt estate that had just told retirees there was nothing left for their health care.
Many of those same retirees had spent over a decade contributing 8% of their own salary into an employee stock ownership plan, a retirement benefit Polaroid had specifically created back in 1988, partly, ironically, to help protect the company from being taken over by outsiders. As Polaroid's stock collapsed through the 1990s, so did the value sitting inside that plan. When the company's core assets were finally sold off in 2002 for $255 million, that sale reportedly included further bonuses and stock options for the very executives who had overseen the bankruptcy. The employees' shares were essentially worthless. Betty Moss started at Polaroid as a file clerk straight out of high school. She spent 35 years there. Dan O'Neill spent 31 years there as a machinist. It was a family, he said afterward. After years fighting in bankruptcy court, the Retirees Association reached a settlement: $47 per person. The company didn't disappear quietly after that either. In 2005, what remained of Polaroid was purchased by an investment group called Petters Group Worldwide, led by a businessman named Tom Ketters. Petters would later be revealed to be running one of the largest Ponzi schemes in American history, worth billions of dollars. When that scheme finally collapsed in 2008, Polaroid, caught in the wreckage of a fraud that had nothing to do with cameras or film at all, filed for bankruptcy a second time. Here's the part of the story almost nobody expects. That same year, 2008, as Polaroid's original film production finally shut down for good, a small group of former Polaroid employees in the Netherlands refused to let it end there.
At the company's old film factory in Enschede, they started a company of their own. They called it the Impossible Project. Their entire mission was absurdly simple: keep manufacturing instant film compatible with all the old Polaroid cameras still sitting in attics and closets across the world. No corporate backing, no massive marketing budget, just people who used to make this product, refusing to let the format they'd spent their careers building simply vanish. The chemistry alone nearly defeated them. Polaroid's original film formulas had never been fully documented in a way outsiders could simply follow. Decades of institutional knowledge had walked out the door along with the employees who used to run those machines. The people starting the Impossible Project were, in a very real sense, reverse engineering their own former jobs. It took them years of chemistry failures to get the formula right again. They kept going anyway. In 2017, that same small company acquired the rights to the Polaroid name itself, rebranding as Polaroid Originals. By 2020, they'd simplified it even further: Polaroid. The name was back, this time run by people who actually cared whether the format survived. There's a strange kind of justice buried in that ending. The corporation that invented instant photography, that legally proved its own rivals stole from it, that once employed 20,000 people and called itself a family, that corporation still managed to lose almost everything and left the people who built it with next to nothing to show for it. But the invention itself survived anyway. Not because of the executives who ran the company into bankruptcy twice. Because of the people who actually made the film, in the actual factory, who couldn't quite let go of something that mattered to them. Edwin Land used to say his goal was never really photography at all. It was closing the gap between an experience and the memory of it, making the weight disappear entirely. The company he built eventually forgot which part of that idea was actually the invention. It wasn't the corporation. It was never the balance sheet. It was that small, strange piece of magic between pressing a button and holding proof that a moment happened at all.
Somewhere out there, Dan O'Neill's $47 check is probably long gone. But somewhere else, right now, someone is shaking a freshly printed photograph, waiting for an image to climb up out of nothing. That part, at least, they couldn't kill.